So today we're going to talk about parking and the City of Palo Alto's efforts to streamline its parking programs, including introducing potentially paid parking and revamping the neighborhood parking permit system. I'm really pleased to welcome Philip Kamhi, our new Chief Transportation Official. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So you started in August as Chief Transportation Official, but you were here before working for the city. I'm wondering if you could just tell us briefly about your career in transportation and
Sure.
your interests.
Yeah, well, I started actually in transportation. Well, I've worked in transportation my whole career, but my career semi-started before I was working, following my dad, who is in transportation.
Oh, wow.
So I went with him to city council meetings and planning commission meetings, and followed his transportation career before I started my own.
Family
so
business.
Yeah, my whole career was in transportation. My dad worked for LA Metro when I was little, and I would go to subway openings and all of that. So been around transportation all my life. As you mentioned, I was previously an employee with the City of Palo Alto. I left for a little over a year and worked for BART as a special projects manager, and now I'm happy to be back here as the Chief Transportation Official.
Well, that's pretty awesome.
Oh, amazing. So you went to a bunch of planning commission meetings as a kid and you decided, I want to do that for the rest of the
Yeah, I found it really interesting, yeah.
Great. Well, in addition to your starting, the city has separated out the Office of Transportation into its own department that reports to the city manager now. Can you tell us, since you were here before and you're here now, what difference can the residents expect in having an actual Office of Transportation?
Yeah, so I think the action to take it out, obviously it happened before I was back at the city while I was gone, but was to recognize the prominence of transportation issues in the communities in Palo Alto. And the council priorities reflect that. There's transportation and traffic is one of the priorities, grade separation is one of their priorities, climate change is one of their priorities, which is something that transportation has a heavy impact on. So, from an operational standpoint, a lot of the changes are in order to reflect, for the resources to reflect those priorities.
Sure, yeah.
And so, we are aligning our resources. I'm actually, one of the things, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a bit later, but I'm hiring to get my staff resources aligned with the project demands.
Yeah, it seems like there's been a lot of projects coming at the department and not enough staffing.
Yeah, and Philip mentioned a few council priorities. It's worth pointing out that transportation is probably the only one that's been there for 6 straight years. So it's less of like a 2019 priority as more of like a priority that's been kind of people have grumbled about and talked about and were really passionate about since well before Philip's first tenure here. Yeah. But I did want to ask, because in addition to organizational change, the change in how the department is constructed, you did mention that there's more resources now. So how many people does the office currently have, and how many will it have by the time you're done with your recruiting?
Well, so the eventual office as it's designed is 15.48 positions. And currently we're about 2/3 of that are filled. We've got one new position that's going to start next month, and 2 more positions that are currently out for recruitment that we're going to be starting the interview process for next week. And I'm sure we'll talk about one of those. One of those is our parking manager. And we're going to be doing interviews for it next week. We've got a senior engineer position that we're going to be recruiting for that will be our manager of engineering programs in our division. And
is that the person that's involved with grade separation?
That will be the person that's involved in grade separation. And one other part-time position to deal with parking citation issues, and then an admin associate, which is our administrative assistant, that will be helping out and is currently in recruitment as well.
So let's talk about parking. There's many things we could talk about in transportation, but one of the newest ideas that the council is going to consider on Monday is this idea of paid parking downtown. Could you talk about what that could entail, what's being explored?
Right. So the item that's going to council on Monday is for a contract with Dixon Resources, which has been a contractor that we've used in the past to explore paid parking. And really what they're being brought in to do, we have two separate tasks that we want them to work on. One is the automated parking guidance systems, which is, I guess, getting a little less fanfare, but what it is like kind of the systems that will allow us to better manage our inventory in our parking garages. Could be the red light, green light, purple light,
overhead.
or whatever, overhead,
Yeah,
to allow us not only to have somebody drive into a garage and see an open spot, but also to allow us to better control our inventory to make sure that we're maximizing the usage of the garages.
So is it going to be the kind of thing where you see how many open spots there are when you get into the entrance, or if it says garage full, or are we talking
potentially,
more about
but,
once you get
but
it?
also it could, I should say, allow us to change if we want a space to be a permit space, or if we want it to be an hourly space, or give us more internal controls over how we maximize the usage of the garage.
Okay.
So that's the first
one part,
task,
yeah.
and then the second task is to explore, what you mentioned is as paid parking, but it's really to do the work in completing studies that were already going on to look at the financial modeling that could occur if paid parking is deemed viable, and it will go through a public process, outreach and discussions with stakeholders. Before council determines whether it's viable. And I just want to mention that this study isn't necessarily saying this is how we will do paid parking.
Okay.
It's saying if we were to do paid parking, this is the recommended way of approaching it. So it's really intended to be a comprehensive look at how we could implement paid parking and how it would work financially. And also to integrate with all the other parking programs that exist.
I feel like Dixon already kind of did that in 2017, or 17 or 18 or 16, when they last did a downtown parking look, like a broad look in downtown, and they actually recommended paid parking, and they got pretty specific about like dynamic price zones, $250 an hour, maybe closer to downtown, $150 a little more in the periphery. So how is this different? Because I feel like with this contract, they're almost like being asked to help find a vendor, and it's pretty explicit about actually implementing it as opposed to just kind of exploring.
I think what this is more focused on, and you're right. It finishes work that was completed in that original study. Some of that stuff had been sent out to have other looks taken at it as well by council and by PTC. If I'm recalling correctly, you have to forgive me, it's been a little while.
Yeah, PTC was skeptical.
Yeah, PTC had some issues with it. So really it's taking a look at, those issues that were raised. It's also, referring to Wayne Tonda's, from our consultant from MRG's report. And it'll also be working with stakeholders. And I think that's really a key is, finding out whether there's viability with stakeholders.
Yeah, it seems like with any proposed change, there's going to be some concerns raised, and sometimes those concerns don't come in even until you start the program, and then people wonder why there weren't conversations beforehand. So in this case, I'm hearing that merchants might have some worries that this will discourage folks from coming downtown and spending their money.
Yep.
This has been historically the case when they abolished meters in the 70s. I think it was mostly the merchants' complaints. Yeah, so what's different about today?
Well, I don't know that there's something different. Well, there's a lot different about today, but I think that our sense is that people will still come down if there's a reasonable amount of parking availability. And so if there's parking availability as opposed to a lack of spaces, it could potentially drive more customers downtown. If there's actual turnover of spaces, it's possible that the study might indicate that that's not the case.
So the contract on Monday, is that for a certain set period of time within 6 months you're going to expect a report back, or?
I'm so sorry, I do not know the details.
Okay.
Offhand.
I'm sure there's some sort of horizon on there.
Yes.
One word in parking these days is streamlining, and I know we have these parking permit programs in neighborhoods, and for some reason they're a little bit different from each other. Can you tell us what's happening with permit programs and what the goal is?
Sure. Well, I want to come back to something that I mentioned earlier, that I'm hiring a parking manager. So this is going to be one of the key roles of that parking manager is to do this work. But that said, we have 6 different RPPs with the adoption of the old Palo Alto RPP. There are some differences between the different districts. There's also some similarities. So the latest district that was enacted as a pilot, the Old Palo Alto RPP district, and RPP is the Residential Preferential Parking Programs. So the Old Palo Alto RPP is similar to our Crescent Park, or
The College Terrace.
College Terrace and Crescent Park programs where they don't have employee permits. And so they also have, do not have a free permit component for the residents. So we have 6 parking programs, but they all do have some differences. And they also all take a lot of administrative work in managing them, in determining whether there's parking impacts, whether the parking impacts have been addressed through the program. And so really one of the broad things that we'd like to have PTC, Planning and Transportation Commission, and the council take a look at is, are there ways that we could harmonize these programs? Are there ways that the programs can be holistically managed? Is it a parking availability standard? And actually, more broadly, is RPP the right answer for all of these parking intrusion issues?
Right.
And just stepping back again, I want to just make sure it's really well known that all of these programs were resident, community-based and community-initiated, and really initiated by the residents based on parking intrusions.
Yeah.
So is the main goal in this just to make it more administratively kind of easier to deal with, or is there other issues, including like, why are these people paying for permits and these aren't? Why is the employee? Like, is it more like staff focused, these changes, or is it more like community focused?
So I would say it's both. It's not purely, and even the administrative issues that we want to correct are not just for the administration for the Office of Transportation. It's also so that we can react more quickly to a concern. So if a resident has an issue, or residents have an issue saying, hey, the parking occupancy on my block is not, it's still, I can't find a parking space. We can adjust the program to better meet their needs. So that's the administrative side. I'm sorry, what was the first question?
Oh no, I'm just asking if the main goals are mostly to make things easier to run, or if it's more to make the programs more kind of equitable, more consistent, just so
I would say
the fairness angle kind of.
Yeah, the answer I would say is both potentially.
I wanted to see if we could broaden the discussion a little bit, because I know that you walk the line, not you personally, but the city of Palo Alto walks the line between providing a solution for a problem versus trying to change people's behaviors so that the problem doesn't exist in the first place. And I'm just kind of wanting to get your thoughts on how do you kind of know when a garage is necessary versus some other things, for example, that would decrease the number of people who are actually driving and parking and taking roads.
That's an interesting question. I think our role in transportation is to, really, and I wish I had my mission or purpose in front of me. I know it's somewhere in the report, but it's really to reduce, single occupancy vehicle use. It's to, influence changes that result in decreased traffic and pollution. So I would say that's primarily our role. So there is a bit of balancing of the different trade-offs in all of our different programs.
Yeah, so that's kind of baked in, that idea of fewer people on the roads, in cars, solo, and trying to help the environment by that. Because there's been a number of cases in which the council had to make the decision: garage, no garage, garage, no garage, and or starting other programs to try to encourage people to take bikes, take scooters, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Building a 6-level garage doesn't seem to be entirely consistent with the goal of reducing single occupant vehicles, but I know this decision was made well before your time by the council. And just FYI, the mission, since you were wondering.
Thank you.
Preserve and enhance the quality of life for Palo Alto residents, visitors, and businesses by providing efficient and cost-effective transportation services for all modes of transportation, which I guess includes driving. So
yeah, it does.
Can we talk a little bit about a bike share and scooter share? Because the city's been standing here with arms open for a while, and there haven't been companies coming in, to my knowledge, So where is that at right now?
So I would say, we're not really arms wide open. So we haven't been turning away scooter or bike share companies or not getting requests. We have been hearing from bike or scooter share, primarily scooter share companies that are very interested in coming in. We are refining the program guidelines that would allow them to come in to make sure that hopefully when they come in that they are not just littered across our streets and that they're doing it in a thoughtful manner for this pilot program.
Okay. I thought there was a pilot.
There's been like two years of pilot programs being extended. So has nothing been done on this?
Yeah, so the
first 2 years?
pilot was approved twice, as you mentioned, but guidelines were never developed for how that pilot would work. So we've got guidelines that are currently being reviewed with legal that will allow actually the vendors to apply, because there's no process for them to apply, even though a pilot program was approved by council.
How long do you expect that to take, the legal to review the guidelines in the program to actually start? You're talking months, or I mean, you mentioned you're probably going to ask for another extension because I think March is when it expires, the latest pilot, right?
Yeah, I can't remember if it's March or April, but whatever it is, it's too soon for us to really evaluate a pilot. So whatever it is, we'll probably ask for a year evaluation. I can't say how long it takes for the review because I don't know how much back and forth we'll have and how close we are to having it ready to go. I'm hoping that it's fairly close to being ready to go and we can get it out there fairly quickly.
Are you leaning a lot on kind of experiments in other cities? Is this the kind of thing where you could just take guidelines that Santa Monica or some other city has and just tweak them, or is this something that you're doing kind of from scratch?
We're definitely not doing it from scratch. We're learning from our own lessons and talking to our neighbors and other communities and learning from a really rapidly evolving program or programs. As I mentioned earlier, that we're hearing from primarily scooter share companies. The bike share companies are really stepping back and switching their programs to scooter share primarily, seemingly because they make more money off of scooter share.
I have another quick question. Is there any kind of thought to doing like a broader one, like a regional program with surrounding cities? I know recently, we covered the Manzanita talks, and I know that in your prior stint with the city, you were kind of one of the liaisons for the TMA, Palo Alto TMA. Is there any kind of regional approaches, either on bike share or on any other initiatives, any way that Palo Alto could partner with Stanford, Menlo, Mountain View?
Yeah, well, more broadly, the Manzanita talks are going on, and I am still getting involved in the TMA again. But regarding scooter share specifically, we've been talking with Mountain View, who on, I believe, the 29th of this month is going to their council to do a scooter share. So we've been talking with them about possible ways of coordinating to make sure that if somebody rides from Mountain View, they could potentially leave their scooter here and vice versa. I think that a regional approach to this is going to be worthwhile. And more generally, regional coordination is really important to transportation. It's not a functioning transportation network if we're just looking at one individual street or one individual block. It needs to be a regional consideration.
So do you think something like a sub-regional TMA, is that kind of like an ambitious aspirational goal? Because that was like one of the big things that came out of Manzanita talks. Or is this something that you think could actually happen, given the hyperlocal nature of some of the problems? The need for regional solutions.
I think there does need to be regional consideration. I'm not really sure. I haven't been that involved in the Manzanita talks. I just saw their report.
Yeah, it just came out recently.
Yeah,
that's more of a broad question.
It is, and I'd say it's high level, and it's a good idea because there is a need for that regional coordination. I'm not sure if from a functional level if that's ready. Our TMA is still growing and still working out kinks. They're making improvements, but I'm not sure whether that's the vehicle for regional coordination or not.
And it seems like TMA can get a big boost if this paid parking thing goes across, because I think they would expect to be the beneficiaries of some of that revenue, I assume, right?
Potentially.
I want to loop back to one thing you were mentioning before, which is outreach, and specifically talk about sort of more proactive outreach to residents. I know you had some ideas about maybe knocking on doors, or could you talk a little bit about your emphasis on getting residents kind of involved in the decision-making or the formation of ideas?
Right. I don't want to scare residents thinking that I'm going to show up at their door banging on it, but I think that a proactive approach to discussions with the community is going to be really critical for the Transportation Department, Office of Transportation. So I do intend to be out in the community. We're working on developing a program of transportation talks. We'll have actually a community meeting next month for Crescent Park, where we'll be talking about resident-driven traffic calming. So residents have asked us to do some traffic calming in their neighborhood, and so we're going to be working with them on developing, discussing with them, potential approaches and working on temporary treatments, so that we're putting stuff out in the street that can be removed, but putting it out there and letting them react to it, as opposed to installing something permanent and having it be there and then having them react to it. So, I see it as an opportunity to have discussions, and just more broadly, I want to go out to the community, not necessarily when we have projects or something that's been resident driven, but go out and talk and hear about potential issues that could be unreported or not discussed, or hasn't come to the point of a petition yet. So that I'm hearing about somebody that doesn't have the time to go to city council and talk, or doesn't have time to come to my office and talk to me, hearing about their issues with transportation.
Yeah. Are there ways that people can contact you right now? Should they email you, or should they go to a website somewhere? Or?
So we have a transportation email. It's transportation@cityofpaloalto.org. That's a great way to get a hold of us. We have a 311 system if you have a specific service request. Our 311 service is a great way for us to track and monitor and keep you or a resident informed on service request. So if you want a stop sign or a red curb or speed humps or whatever, that's the way to let us know. And we also have a newsletter that I unfortunately don't remember the URL for, but if you go onto our city website, you can likely find that. It's going to be starting. We're about to release our first edition of our transportation newsletter.
Oh, cool.
And we also have a separate one for grade separation. And you can learn more about our grade separation process on connectingpaloalto.com. At least I remember that URL.
Yeah. Sounds good.
And it seems like outreach was particularly an issue during the Ross Road Bike Boulevard, and I'm not going to go back into that project, but it sounds like there's been a lot of kind of contrition by the council and others about the outreach for that. And from what I remember, because of that, there was kind of a pause on bike boulevards. I just wanted to ask you where the city's bike boulevard plan stands and what you guys plan to do. Is it still something that's in freeze mode, or?
Yes, I would say freeze mode, yeah.
And I do understand that Charleston Restradero is still happening, because that's kind of part of the council infrastructure plan that's going on. So what can we expect?
Yeah, so I guess freeze mode is a somewhat accurate term. It's on hold. Currently, the phase 2 is not moving forward. We are developing a report back on our findings from the first phase of the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Bike Boulevards project, NTSBB, Bike Boulevards as it's commonly known. So we're going to be doing a report back to council. We're collecting data on that, which includes auto rates, traffic rates, traffic counts, bike and ped counts, collision data from before and after the project, or before and during the implementation of the project, and also a survey that was a follow-up to a survey that was taken during construction, and we're going to be conducting a survey now so that we can understand how attitudes might have changed on the project.
Oh, great. When do you expect that to go to the council, the survey, the report?
So hopefully in either late winter or early 2020.
Okay, and sometime after that, you guys will determine what to do with the next phase of the bike boulevards?
So then that discussion about the next phase will likely come at the same time as we present the findings, or following the findings from the first phase, because we want council to have all the information about what we found from the first phase before we move on to the second phase.
Okay, makes sense.
Well, Philip, your scope of work is certainly broad. We could continue talking about grade separations and shuttles and whatnot, but we'll wrap it up for this time. Was there anything else that you wanted to add before we sign off?
No, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. That wraps up this edition of Behind the Headlines. If you think of other people who might be interested in this discussion, you can always share this video or podcast by hitting the share link below. And to keep up on all Palo Alto news, go to paloaltoonline.com or visit our Facebook or Twitter pages. We'll see you next week.